Hello there. Welcome to Depths of Unknown. There is a place in the South Pacific Ocean where the seafloor simply disappears. Not gradually, not gently, but abruptly, violently, like the earth itself opened its mouth and swallowed the ocean floor whole. It drops away and keeps dropping for nearly 11 kilometers. Into a darkness so absolute and a pressure so incomprehensible that no unprotected human could survive there even for the fraction of a second it would take the ocean to reduce them to nothing. This is the Tonga Trench, one of the deepest, most geologically violent, most biologically strange environments on the surface of this planet. It sits in the waters between New Zealand and Fiji, the product of one of the most powerful tectonic collisions currently occurring anywhere on Earth. Almost no one truly understands what it would mean to be there, in the water, in the dark, under the weight of 11 kilometers of ocean above you. This is the story of why the Tonga Trench kills. Not metaphorically, not eventually, immediately and completely. To understand why the Tonga Trench is unsurvivable for any unprotected human, you need to start with the geology, because the geology is what makes everything else possible. The Tonga Trench is formed by the subduction of the Pacific Plate beneath the Tonga Plate, a tectonic collision occurring at one of the fastest recorded rates of movement on Earth, approximately 15 to 24 centimeters per year. As the Pacific Plate dives into the Earth's mantle, the seafloor above is dragged downward, creating a trench of extraordinary depth. The deepest point, known as the Horizon Deep, reaches approximately 10,800 meters. The Tonga Trench is deep enough to swallow Mount Everest entirely, with more than 1.5 kilometers of Pacific Ocean still above the summit. The pressure at that depth is approximately 1,100 times atmospheric pressure at sea level. Your car tire runs at about 2 to 3 atmospheres. The Tonga Trench exerts 1,100 atmospheres on everything within it. This is not a place where humans struggle to survive. It is a place where the physics of human biology simply fails. The first and most immediate reason a human body cannot survive here is pressure. And to understand why pressure is lethal, you need to understand what it actually does to biological systems at these depths. The human body is approximately 60% water, which is essentially incompressible. This sounds helpful, but the human body is not uniformly fluid. The lungs, sinuses, ears, intestines all contain air spaces, gas-filled cavities that are absolutely compressible. At surface pressure, these are essential to life. Under the pressure of the Tonga Trench, they become the mechanism of destruction. Pressure at 10,800 meters would compress the lungs from their normal 6 liters to roughly the volume of a tennis ball. The air spaces in the sinuses and middle ear would collapse. Multiple organ systems would fail simultaneously. And this would not happen gradually, not over minutes. Or it would happen in essentially the same instant the body reached full depth pressure, faster than consciousness, faster than pain, faster than any biological response could begin. Before pressure even becomes dominant, temperature would be doing its own lethal work. At the surface of the South Pacific, water temperatures reach 24 to 28 degrees Celsius, warm and survivable. As you descend through the thermocline, temperature drops sharply. By 200 meters, it is already in single digits. At 1,000 meters, it is near 4 degrees Celsius. At the bottom of the Tonga Trench, the water temperature sits between 1 and 2 degrees, just barely above freezing. Cold water conducts heat away from the human body approximately 25 times more efficiently than cold air of the same temperature. Without thermal protection, a human being immersed in near freezing water would enter severe hypothermia within minutes and die within 15 to 30 minutes. The cold water of the deep Tonga Trench would kill you long before you reached the bottom, even if the pressure did not exist. You would not arrive at the deepest point. You would die somewhere in the descent, in cold darkness, long before the worst of it. The darkness is not lethal in itself, but it deserves its own consideration because it is one of the dimensions of the Tonga Trench that the human mind finds most difficult to truly process. Sunlight penetrates to a maximum of roughly 200 meters in the clearest tropical water, and even there it is the faintest blue twilight. At 1,000 meters there is no sunlight. At 10,800 meters, the bottom of the Tonga Trench has never, in the entire history of the Earth, received a single photon of solar radiation. This is not darkness as experienced in a dark room, where the eyes adapt and shapes resolve. This is chemical darkness, the permanent and total absence of the electromagnetic radiation the human visual system was designed to detect. Human eyes at the bottom of the Tonga Trench would not be in darkness. They would simply be non-functional. Biological structures designed for a specific type of physical input that does not exist at that depth. The Tonga Trench also presents a chemical environment hostile to human biology in ways that are less dramatic but equally lethal. Dissolved oxygen in deep ocean water is extremely low. Replenished by photosynthesis at the surface and by atmospheric contact, dissolved oxygen decreases with depth. In certain depth zones called oxygen minimum zones, concentrations drop to levels incompatible with mammalian metabolism. Even if a human could somehow withstand the pressure and temperature of the Tonga Trench, the water chemistry through the descent would be physiologically hostile to the respiratory demands of any air breathing. The oxygen-dependent mammal. The chemical environment of the deep ocean is as alien to human biochemistry as the vacuum of space. Different mechanism, identical result. Then there is the geology itself, active, violent, and unstable in ways that go beyond the mere depth. The Tonga Trench is the product of the fastest subduction rate on Earth, and this generates some of the most intense seismic and volcanic activity on the planet. The 2022 eruption of Hunga Tonga Hunga Hapai, one of the most powerful volcanic eruptions in recorded human history, was generated by the volcanic arc created by this subduction zone. The explosion generated pressure waves detected worldwide, tsunamis across the Pacific, and injected enough water vapor into the stratosphere to temporarily affect global temperatures. At depth, within the trench itself, the geological activity manifests as hydrothermal venting and continuous seismic events. The floor of the Tonga Trench is not stable ground. It is an active geological boundary, and anything on it is subject to forces that operate on scales of energy that dwarf anything in human experience. The human body was designed by evolution for a very specific range of conditions. Core temperature must remain within roughly 2 to 3 degrees of 37 degrees Celsius for cellular metabolism to function. The pressure must be near 1 atmosphere for the respiratory and cardiovascular systems to operate as designed. Adequate oxygen must be available. Light must be present for the visual system. These are not optional parameters. They are the hard constraints within which human biology works, shaped by millions of years of evolution on the sunlit savannas and forests of eastern Africa. The Tonga Trench is the photographic negative of every one of those conditions. Every single parameter that human biology requires is absent or catastrophically exceeded simultaneously. It is as if someone listed every condition necessary for human life and then engineered an environment that violated every one of them at once. Technology can partially solve the problem, but only barely, only at extraordinary cost, and only by wrapping the human body in engineering that effectively creates an artificial surface environment inside a shell of specialized metal. A deep submersible is essentially a pressurized spacecraft operating in water. The Deep-Sea Challenger, used by James Cameron to visit the Challenger Deep in 2012, had a pressure sphere machined from high-strength steel approximately 109 millimeters thick, about 4 inches, designed to resist over 1,000 atmospheres. Cameron spent 3 hours at the deepest point on Earth, separated from instant death by 4 inches of metal. No crewed vehicle has visited the Tonga Trench's horizon deep. The logistics of operating in the remote South Pacific are formidable. The risk is immense. A single structural failure at 10,800 meters is immediately and unrecoverably fatal. There is no rescue at that depth. You are more isolated than an astronaut on Mars. The creatures that live in the Tonga Trench have solved the problems that kill humans through hundreds of millions of years of evolutionary engineering. Hadal snailfish, documented at extreme depths, use elevated concentrations of trimethylamine oxide, TMAO, which stabilizes proteins against the crushing effect of hydrostatic pressure. Their cell membranes are enriched with unsaturated fatty acids that remain fluid at near freezing temperatures and extreme pressures where other membranes would rigidify and fail. Their eyes have been repurposed from detecting sunlight to detecting bioluminescence. Their lateral line sensory systems allow orientation and prey detection in total darkness. These adaptations are the accumulated result of millions of years of selection pressure in an environment that eliminated every variant that couldn't survive. A human dropped into the Tonga Trench has none of these adaptations. The fish belong there. We fundamentally, irreducibly do not. The amphipods of the Tonga Trench are perhaps the most successful colonizers of the Hadal Zone in the entire South Pacific. These small crustaceans achieve concentrations at depth that are almost impossible to believe, given the apparent hostility of the environment. Bait drops deployed to the trench floor are mobbed within hours by thousands of amphipods that somehow detected the chemical signature of food from extraordinary distances through cold, dark, pressurized water. And their success is a product of the same evolutionary toolkit: pressure-resistant biochemistry, cold-adapted membrane structure, sensory systems tuned for darkness and pressure. And in recent research, these animals have been found to contain concentrations of anthropogenic pollutants at levels that exceed the most heavily polluted coastal waters on Earth. The creatures that live in the most extreme environment on the planet are carrying the chemical signature of human industrial civilization in their bodies. The Tonga Trench is unsurvivable for humans. It is not, apparently, unreachable by the consequences of what humans do. What the Tonga Trench ultimately represents is a profound statement about the specific and narrow boundaries of the world that human biology was built for. The universe is almost entirely hostile to human life. The vast majority of Earth's surface, the ocean floors, the water column, the high altitude zones, the polar regions, is outside the survival parameters of an unprotected human. The thin band of conditions in which humans can survive without technology is narrow, specific, and, in geological terms, extremely recent. The Tonga Trench is not unusual in being lethal to humans. What is unusual is how completely and immediately it exceeds the human survival envelope in every measurable dimension at once. It is not merely cold, it is not merely dark, it is not merely deep. It is all of these things simultaneously, to extremes that compound into something categorically unsurvivable by any biological system that did not evolve there. The Tonga Trench will remain unsurvivable for unprotected humans for as long as humans exist. The physics that make it lethal are the physics of water, pressure, and thermodynamics. Laws that engineering can work around but cannot change. Future exploration will rely on increasingly capable autonomous vehicles and robotic systems that can withstand the conditions because they don't need air, warmth, or pressure regulation. These systems are already revealing a biological world that exceeds anything previously predicted. Species diversity that grows with every expedition. Our ecological complexity that contradicts the intuition that extreme environments must be biologically impoverished. Geological activity that connects the trench to the surface world through the mechanisms of subduction and eruption. The Tonga Trench is one of the most scientifically significant environments on Earth. For any unprotected human, it is as immediately and completely fatal as anything that exists on the surface of this planet. 11 kilometers below the South Pacific, or in water barely above freezing, under pressure that would reduce a human body to ruin in milliseconds, in a darkness that has never known sunlight, the Tonga Trench continues doing what it has done for millions of years. The Pacific Plate continues its inexorable descent into the mantle. The geology generates its earthquakes, its volcanic arcs, its hydrothermal vents. The snailfish hunt in the dark. The amphipods swarm toward chemical signals drifting through ancient water. The xenophyophores build their strange single-celled architecture on the sediment floor. And the trench remains what it has always been. A place that the physics of this planet built for purposes that have nothing to do with human life, that will continue to exist, to harbor its biological secrets, and to remind us that the world we were built for is not the only world that exists. It is simply the only one we were made to survive.